Morning, everyone. Well, actually, afternoon, better said. So my name is Beatriz Garcia, and today I'm going to be giving a talk about empathy. Um, I work for a charity called Street Child United, which I'll be telling you a little bit more about later. Uh, but for now, if you could go to next, please, Michael. Great, thank you. So here we have a quote from Obama, which says, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world. And empathy is a human emotion, if you like, that is often undervalued, but is actually very powerful. And as Obama mentions, has capacity to change the way people think, has capacity to change the way that we interact with each other, and can hence make for a better world. Next. So today, the session is going to be broken down into 3 parts. So part 1 is going to be looking at what is empathy specifically. Then part 2 is going to be looking at empathy within the realm of sports and how stories of people who play sports can help us to develop empathy. And the third part is going to be looking at drawing empathy. So we're actually going to be doing a portraiture session. So if you have a pen and paper to hand, keep it with you because for the last part of the session, we're going to be drawing a portrait. Next. Great. So what is empathy? Next. So empathy has been described as a human superpower. So it's our ability to understand and share someone else's feelings. And typically empathy is made up of 3 elements. So we've got the thinking, we've got the acting, and then we've got the feeling. So typically the process starts with thinking. So it's where you allow your imagination to think about somebody else and their personal situation and work out maybe how somebody feels. So acting is then the part where we take that thought and we make it physical, and we're inspired to maybe help others and to maybe look at the way they're feeling. And then the last section is about really feeling those emotions and then using it to, inspire others and to help a better cause. Next. So Simon Baron-Cohen is a scientist who wrote a really interesting book called 0 Degrees of Empathy. And what this looks at essentially is individuals who do not show empathy and why that might be. And he made 2 very important findings within his research. Next. So he found that our plastic brains can develop new neural pathways. What does this mean? It means that 98% of us can build our empathy skills at any point in our lives. So the beauty of this, sorry if we could just go back, Michael. Thank you. I have Michael on the call today helping me with because I had a couple of technical issues earlier. But yes, so the idea is that 98% of us can build our empathy skills at any point in our lives, which means that you can maybe have a level of empathy skills right now, but it's a learnable skill that we can develop throughout our lives. And what we're going to be looking at later in the session is how we can build that empathy. And especially how sports can help us to build empathy. Next. So why does empathy matter? So empathy is an essential life skill for all of us. And it basically will help us to create happier children and stronger communities and a better world. Empathy is important, especially nowadays, because it helps us to connect with others. And, this year with the pandemic has been quite a stressful year for all of us. But empathy helps to bring us back to each other and understand that we're all people. And at the end of the day, we're all trying to live our best lives and be the best version of ourselves. Next. So part 2, empathy and stories. The power of stories. Now, it's nearly impossible to hate anyone whose story you know. This is a quote that Andrew Solomon said, and it rings true because if you understand the background on someone, it's very hard to not find something with which to sympathize with them. Next. So where does Street Child United come into all of this? Next. Street Child United is a charity which uses the power of sport and art to help change the perceptions of street children around the world. And here on the right-hand side, you can see a picture of our founder, John Rowe. And the way that we do this is essentially by telling the stories of these young street-connected people. What we tend to do is we tend to run, sorry, can you go back, Michael, please? Thank you. So what we do is we run sports tournaments. We had the first one in South Africa, then in Rio, and then in Moscow in 2018. And the next event that we have coming up is in Doha in 2022. And the idea of these sporting tournaments is to bring street-connected children from all over the world to the host country of the FIFA World Cup. And they then play a football tournament where they get to connect with each other through sport. A lot of these young people don't speak the same language, but they have one thing in common, that they all have a passion for football and that they all want to be a power for change within their community. So we run this sports tournament, and alongside it, we also run an arts festival where we allow the young people to express themselves creatively. And we also run congress sessions where the young people can campaign for the rights in their country. And we found that these have been very powerful ways for these young people to then affect change in their host countries. So what I'd like to do now is to share with you a video on one of these young people. So her name is Drica, and she's from Brazil. And we're going to play a short video and then I can explain a little bit about it. Great, thank you, Michael. So this short video clip shows us about Drica, who is was a street connected child from Brazil, and she has a dream to play football, and she's a prime example of one of our young individuals who has played in multiple Street Child World Cups and is now back in her community and is helping these young people realize their dreams and appreciate that they are somebody. Because a lot of the time, these street-connected young people are seen as, well, they're voiceless because a lot of them don't have birth certificates. So as far as the law exists, they do not exist and they are not somebody. So our aim is to tell their stories through our tournaments, because then that helps inspire empathy and connectedness with others. And sport is a really powerful tool because, as I mentioned before, a lot of these young people don't necessarily speak the same language. So they're then able to interact with other people who've been through similar experiences themselves and are then able to go back into their communities. Next. Great, so the power of stories. So here I've got some quotes from some of the young people who have been taking part in our tournaments. So the first one is from Andile, and he says, "When people see me on the street, they say I am a street child. But when they see me playing football, they say I'm a person like you." And what's really amazing about this quote is that through the power of sport and him being able to play football in our tournaments, he has now been recognised as an individual. Seeing him as a football player allows us to empathise with him, and as a result has completely transformed his life. And the other quote we have here is that the hands that were raised to beat us on the street are now raised to honour us. So a few months back, we were attacked as criminals, but today we have an identity as national players. And this is from Roshan, who was a captain of Team Nepal at the Street Shell World Cup in Moscow in 2018. So the amazing thing about sport as well is that it can transform people's perceptions of these young people. A lot of the time, these young people are seen as something negative. They're criminals, delinquents who are up to no good, whereas actually when they're seen as football players and as individuals, it can go a long way to transforming people's perceptions of them. Next. And here we have an image made by the photographer Vicky Roy, which says, "I am somebody." And again, it's that idea that sport can help us to empathize with these individuals by making us realize that they are a person in their own right, and that just as they, irrespective of their background, they have their own hopes, their own dreams, and are individuals in their own right. And yeah, it's only by practicing empathy that we can sympathize with these individuals. So we're now going to be going into the third section, which is going to be on drawing empathy. So if you don't have a pen and paper to hand, I'm just going to give you a minute to pick up a piece of paper and a pencil. At this point in time, are there any questions about the content so far? Okay, great. Okay, so hopefully you've all had a minute to grab a piece of paper and a pencil. So we're gonna begin on this section. Next. Right, building empathy. On the right-hand side, you can see an image of one of the participants from the Rio Street Shell World Cup. Her name was Jessica, and she plays for Team Brazil. And here we have a mural of her shouting out on a megaphone. And this mural was created by Joel Bergner from Artolution, who's one of the artists that we partner with. And the beauty of this mural is that, although perhaps you cannot appreciate it in the image, everywhere on Jessica's face and on her body are lots of different little images drawn by street-connected individuals. So they're all portraits of themselves, combining in to make one big portrait of Jessica. And the idea of drawing a portrait is that when we're taking all the features on an individual's face, so from your eyes to the position of your eyebrows, your nose, your lips, whether your face is round or square, if it's more oval shaped, it allows us to build empathy with others, because by looking in detail at an individual, you start to see similarities with yourself. So here we have this mural of Jessica, but actually it's not just Jessica, it's also all these other individuals who helped to create the mural. So that's the power of a portrait, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Next. So how do we build empathy? So we've spoken about the concept before about what empathy is, how we would go about it, the fact that it's a learnable skill, but how is it that we go about building this empathy and increasing our level of empathy? So one of the ways in which traditionally we've built empathy is to read about different people's stories. So it's by exposing yourself to other ways of life, the hardships that maybe some other people have experienced, that then you can develop this empathy and get a wider perspective. So that's the traditional way, if you like, in which people have built empathy. We've also spoken about the power of sport in helping to develop our empathy skills. But today, we're going to be focusing on the portrait. Next. Next, please, Michael. Great, thank you. So drawing a portrait helps us develop empathy because, as I mentioned before, it helps us to appreciate the small details that make up an individual and help us to develop a greater feeling of empathy for that individual. Next. Great. So the drawing session is basically broken down into 4 separate components. So I will talk you through each aspect of the drawing of a portrait. And then if at any point there are any questions, please let me know and I can elaborate on them. So we're going to start, sorry, could you go back? Thanks, Michael. So we're going to start by drawing a portrait. So the first step in drawing a portrait is to note the angle in which we're going to draw it. So lots of famous portraits have been drawn in 3/4 view, such as, for example, the Mona Lisa. But the best way to start is to start with a full frontal view, because generally most face shapes are symmetrical and it's easier to learn about the different shapes and where they all sit when you're drawing it a full frontal view. And then as you develop your skills, then you can draw it in 3/4 view. Because what happens when you draw it in 3/4 view, which is like this, is that the proportions of the face change. So what we would start with is to draw an egg shape on a piece of paper. So on the shape that I have on the screen now, it's approximately 8 centimeters down by 6 centimeters across, but obviously depending on your face shape and size, that will vary. And we'll also want to draw in the neck. So on the left-hand side, you can see that the line for the neck is a little bit straighter, and the one on the right is at a slight diagonal. With the neck, a common misperception that people have is that it's a lot thinner than it is, but it actually takes up quite, as you can see on the image, quite a lot of the width of the face. So make sure to not make it too thin. Next. So before we go through any of the content, here you can see the face, and I've drawn some lines on it. Now these lines are going to tell you where everything is positioned. So it may look a little bit confusing, but actually I will explain all of it. So the first step is actually to work out where the center of your face is. So as I mentioned before, my head shape is approximately 8 centimeters long. So at the 4 centimeter mark, I drew a horizontal line that's labeled middle, and I'd like you to do the same on your drawing. Now, by drawing that line, essentially that line tells you where your eyes sit. So if you can see on my face, the distance from my eye line up to my hairline, it's approximately the same distance as from my eye line down to the bottom of my chin. So that's the first line that we're going to put in. Next. Yeah, perfect. Next. So now we're going to draw the brow line. So the brow line sits just above that line that we've called middle. And essentially that is going to be the bottom end of the top third of our face. So once we've drawn in that brow line, which in my image I did about 0.6 centimeters above the central line, the middle line, we're then going to split our face into 3 separate thirds. We're going to split it into the first third, which is from the brow line up to the hairline. So if you just draw approximately a third up, then from the brow line down to the nose is going to be our second line. So what I did was, if you just measure with your hand the distance from the hairline to the brow line, just copy that distance just below your brow line, and where that line falls is where the base of your nose is going to be. And then knowing the measure, you then measure from the nose, the same distance from your brow to your nose down to where your face ends approximately, and that will be where your chin sits. So it's a little bit confusing, but just to recap, the central line of your face is your eye line, and from your eye line up to your hairline is the same distance approximately from your eye line down to your chin. Obviously, it will vary from individual to individual, but that's the rule of thumb. And then the idea as well to split up the face into 3 separate equal sections, because then in the next stage we're now going to be looking at drawing in the features. So next, right. So now you can see that I've drawn in some of the features, and we're going to be going through some of those features now. Next. So at the eye line, which in the previous diagram is the one I labeled middle, we're gonna draw in 2 circles for eyes, and then above it 2 semicircles, which are gonna be our eyelids. And the rule of thumb when drawing your eyes within your face is that the distance between your eyes is the same size as one eye. So it'd be the same width. And typically your face is 5 eyes across. So if you take the distance of one eye, it should be the same on, or for example, on the right hand side, should be the same distance from your eye to your ear as your eye. So 5 eyes across. Next. Yeah, and as I mentioned, it's 1/5 of the length of your face. So now we're just going to draw in on the nose line, which is the second third of your face. We're going to draw in a horizontal line where the base of our nose is. And typically your nose is in the center of your face. And then next. And then the last line we're going to draw is so a third below the line that we've drawn for our nose. We're going to draw a straight line, and that is where our lips sit at. And one last thing to note on this section as well is to draw in the ears. So the ears will sit just above the eye line, and they will end where your nose ends. So as you can see, I've drawn in 2 ears on either side, so you can draw those in. Great. Do we have any questions? Okay, great. Let's give you a minute to do this last section because there's quite a lot of information, and then we'll go to the last section of our portrait drawing. Okay, great. Next. And now we're going to add the final details to our portrait. So just above our eye line, we're going to want to draw on our brows, which end just after where our eye ends. So they start just where your eye meets the bridge of your nose and end just after your eye at a sort of diagonal angle on both sides. So I want to draw those in. Next. For your lips, we're going to take that line that we drew before and we're going to create a cupid bow at the top of our lips, which will be our top lip. And then for the bottom lip, you're just going to draw a shallow semicircle. Typically, your bottom lip will be larger than your top lip, but again, it depends on your face and on your, the proportions of your face. And as you will see on the diagram, I've drawn two straight lines down from the eyes, and that essentially is to highlight that more or less in the center of your eye is where your lips end on either side of your face. Again, as I mentioned, it varies per individual, but that's the typical rule of thumb. Next. Yeah, and so for the nose, for this portrait, rather than drawing in the full nose, we're giving the impression of a nose. So from the horizontal line that we drew in the previous step, we're going to draw two small horizontal lines next to that line to give the impression of the nostrils. Next. And then finally, the last step would be to draw on your hair. So as you can see, I've taken the hairline line and I've drawn in my parting around it. Art tends to be a paradox. So the trick is to draw what you see, even if it potentially doesn't make sense, because sometimes, yeah, it doesn't make sense, but that's exactly how it is. Great, next. So well done. You should have drawn your own portrait, and hopefully it made sense to you. The great thing with the face is that once you understand the proportions, it's very easy to draw somebody else's face because you have a set of rules, if you like, a structure that you can then base it on. And then it's about looking at how the person's face that you're drawing compares to those rules, or how they actually, their features work against those rules. Next. So the last thing I'd like to leave you on is looking at potentially drawing the portrait of someone that you know. Why would we want to do this? So by drawing a portrait of someone we know, or perhaps someone we don't know, we humanize them. And in this way, we learn and develop empathy for them. Next. Yeah, and as I mentioned before, yeah, paying closer attention to the details that make up their face helps us to sympathize with them, see that we all have the same features, and that at the end of the day, we are all fundamentally the same. Next. And any questions? I appreciate we finished a little bit early, but I'm happy to take any questions you may have on empathy or empathy's position within sports. No? Okay, next. Well, the only last thing is to thank you for your time today. It's been a little bit shorter than the 45 minutes. But yes, hope you enjoyed the presentation. And I think Michael will be sharing the presentation with you all after, so you will have a copy of it. Great, thank you.